Rain pounded against the windows of Harborview on the night 6-year-old Lily Bennett vanished from her second-floor bedroom. The small coastal town, known for its lighthouse and summer tourists, transformed overnight into a scene from every parent's nightmare. Detective Margaret Donovan arrived at the Bennett home just after midnight, rainwater still dripping from her coat. She'd been transferred to Harborview Police Department only 3 weeks earlier, following a traumatic case in Boston that left her seeking the quiet of small-town life. The universe, it seemed, had other plans. The window was locked from the inside, John Bennett, Lily's father, explained, through barely controlled sobs. We checked on her at 9. By 11, when my wife went to kiss her goodnight again, she was gone. Outside, flashlight beams cut through the darkness as volunteers combed the nearby woods. The Coast Guard had boats searching the harbor, though everyone prayed they wouldn't find anything there. News vans had already lined up along the narrow street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the stormy sky. "Detective," a uniformed officer called from the doorway. "There's someone here you might want to talk to." The boy couldn't have been more than 16, tall and slender with sandy blonde hair and clear blue eyes. Despite the late hour and pouring rain, his clothes were only slightly damp, as if he'd been careful to stay under cover. "This is Aaron Campbell," the officer explained. "He lives 3 doors down, says he might have seen something." Donovan studied the teenager's face. His expression conveyed concern, but something about his eyes didn't quite match. Too steady, too focused. "I was up late studying," Aaron explained, his voice calm and measured. "My window faces the Bennett house. Around 10:30, I thought I saw a shadow moving near their back door. I didn't think much of it until I heard the sirens." As Aaron spoke, Donovan noticed how the Bennett parents leaned toward him, desperate for any information. The boy seemed to register their attention, subtly adjusting his posture and softening his voice. "Thank you, Aaron," Donovan said. "We'll need a formal statement tomorrow, but this could be helpful." The teenager nodded solemnly. "I just want to help find Lily. Everyone loves her." By dawn, the rain had stopped, but the search continued. Volunteers gathered at the community center, receiving assignments from weary officers. Aaron Campbell was among the first to arrive, organizing a group of high school students to distribute flyers. "He's such a good kid," whispered Linda Morgan, Harborview High's principal, standing beside Donovan. "Honor student, helps coach Little League, the kind of teenager parents dream of having." Donovan watched as Aaron comforted Mrs. Bennett, his hand on her shoulder, his expression a perfect mask of empathy. Perfect, perhaps, was the word that bothered her. Later that morning, as Donovan reviewed the initial reports, Officer Parker dropped a folder on her desk. Campbell Kid's statement, all typed up and ready to go. Detailed, too. Most witnesses can barely tell you what day it is. Flipping through the pages, Donovan paused at a particular sentence. Aaron had described Lily, wearing pink pajamas with unicorns, a detail the parents had mentioned during the initial interview, but one that hadn't been released to the public. How did Aaron know what Lily was wearing on the night she disappeared? Donovan looked out the window to see the teenager organizing search parties. With remarkable efficiency, his blue eyes scanning the gathered crowd like he was looking for something specific, or someone. By the second day of Lily's disappearance, Harborview had transformed. Search teams combed every inch of woodland surrounding the town. Coast Guard helicopters buzzed overhead, scanning the shoreline with mechanical precision. Local businesses became command posts, their windows plastered with Lily's smiling face. A first-grade photo taken 3 months earlier, her front tooth missing, blonde pigtails slightly uneven. Detective Donovan stood in the high school parking lot watching Aaron Campbell organize his classmates into search teams. The teenager moved with confidence, assigning areas and handing out maps he'd printed himself. "I highlighted the trails most people don't know about," Aaron explained when Donovan approached. "I've been hiking these woods since I was a kid." "That's very thorough," Donovan replied, taking one of the maps. "Some of these trails aren't even on official park maps." Aaron smiled modestly. "My dad and I explored a lot. I know places even locals don't visit." Later that afternoon, Donovan visited Harborview High School. In the principal's office, she reviewed Aaron's immaculate academic record while waiting for his English teacher, Mr. Richards. "He's one of our brightest students," Principal Morgan reiterated. "Early acceptance to 3 colleges already." When Richards arrived, however, his expression suggested a different perspective. "Aaron is brilliant," the teacher began, choosing his words carefully. "But lately, I've been concerned." Richards placed a folder on the desk. Inside were essays Aaron had written over the past semester. Most were technically perfect, well-researched analyses of classic literature. But the most recent assignment, a creative writing piece, told a different story. "We asked them to write about a secret," Richards explained. "Aaron's was unsettling." Donovan read the opening paragraph describing a character who wore a mask so perfect that no one ever suspected what lived behind it. The story detailed the character's methodical study of human emotion, practicing expressions in mirrors until he could make people feel whatever he wanted them to feel. "It's just creative writing," Principal Morgan interjected defensively. "Teenagers explored dark themes all the time." Richards shook his head. "It wasn't just what he wrote, it was how clinical it felt, like an instruction manual." Donovan thanked them both and drove to the Campbell residence, a well-maintained colonial home with a basketball hoop in the driveway. Aaron's parents, Robert and Catherine Campbell, welcomed her with the anxious politeness of people unaccustomed to police visits. "Aaron's been such a comfort to the Bennetts," Catherine said, serving coffee in matching mugs. "He's always been sensitive to others' feelings." "He mentioned hiking trails in the woods," Donovan said casually. "Places most people don't know about." Robert Campbell nodded proudly. "We explored everywhere when he was younger. Aaron has an incredible memory for details." "Does he ever go there alone?" The parents exchanged quick glances. "Sometimes," Robert admitted. "It's his thinking place. But he's always been responsible." After the interview, Donovan waited in her car, watching the Campbell house. 20 minutes later, Aaron returned from the search, entering through the front door. Shortly after, his bedroom light came on. Second floor, corner window. On impulse, Donovan drove back to the Bennett home, now empty while the family stayed with relatives. She stood in Lily's bedroom, looking out the window. From this angle, she could clearly see into Aaron's room across the yards, just as Aaron could see into Lily's. Back at the station, Donovan reviewed security footage from businesses near the Bennett home. At 9:42 p.m. on the night of Lily's disappearance, a figure in a dark jacket walked briskly down Maple Street, away from both the Bennett and Campbell homes. The image was too grainy for facial recognition, but the height and build were consistent with a teenage male. That evening, as Donovan was preparing to leave, Officer Parker rushed in with news. One of the search dogs picked up a scent near Blackberry Creek about 2 miles into the woods. "It's one of those unmarked trails." Donovan looked at the map Aaron had created. Blackberry Creek was clearly marked with a small asterisk. "There's something else," Parker added, lowering his voice. "The dog found a small pink sock. It matches the description of what Lily was wearing." Donovan stared at the map, a chill running down her spine. The trail to Blackberry Creek wasn't on any official map, but somehow Aaron Campbell had known exactly where to look. Dawn broke on the 3rd day of the search with a grim discovery. Lily Bennett's body was found in a shallow depression near Blackberry Creek, partially covered with leaves and forest debris. The area had been searched twice before, including by teams using the maps Aaron had created. Detective Donovan stood in the rain, watching the medical examiner work. The scene suggested the body had been moved, placed there recently, perhaps only hours before discovery. Someone had wanted Lily to be found, but not until they were ready. Time of death appears to be shortly after disappearance, Dr. Rivera said quietly. But she wasn't here the whole time. The ground underneath isn't consistent with 3 days of exposure. By noon, the news had spread through Harborview like wildfire. Grieving neighbors left flowers at the Bennett home. Schools closed for the day, and at the police station, Margaret Donovan made a difficult decision. "Bring him in," she instructed Officer Parker. Quietly, no handcuffs yet. Aaron Campbell sat in the interview room, his posture relaxed, expression appropriately somber. His parents waited outside, assured this was just a routine follow-up, their son helping as a key witness. "Thank you for coming in, Aaron," Donovan began, recording device running. "I wanted to ask you about the maps you made." Aaron nodded. "I hoped they would help find Lily. I just wish we'd found her in time. The thing is," Donovan continued, sliding a photograph across the table, "Lily was found in a location that had already been searched. Twice. A flicker of something. Annoyance? Pride? Crossed Aaron's face before disappearing behind perfect concern. That's terrible. The search teams must have missed her. Or she wasn't there until recently." Donovan watched him carefully. The medical examiner believes her body was moved. Aaron's expression remained steady, but Donovan noticed his fingers, tapping a precise rhythm against his thigh. "You knew what pajamas Lily was wearing the night she disappeared," Donovan stated. "That information wasn't public. Her parents must have mentioned it during the search." "They didn't." Donovan placed Aaron's essay on the table. "You wrote about wearing a mask, Aaron. About studying human emotions to manipulate them." For a moment, Aaron said, "Nothing." Then his posture subtly shifted, straighter, more controlled. "It's creative writing, detective. Fiction. We have security footage of someone matching your description walking away from the Bennett home the night Lily disappeared." Aaron's eyes narrowed slightly. "Lots of people in. Harborview look like me. We also have a warrant to search your house and computer." This time the reaction was unmistakable, a tightening around the eyes, fingers now completely still. "I'd like to speak to my parents, and a lawyer." Hours later, the evidence was overwhelming. A search of Aaron's computer revealed hundreds of searches about missing children cases, police investigation techniques, and body decomposition rates. Hidden in his closet, wrapped in plastic, Lily's missing unicorn pajama top. Most damning was a journal found behind his bookshelf, detailing his fascination with how far he could manipulate perceptions. The final entry, dated the night before Lily's body was discovered. "Tomorrow they find her. Then I watch how they all react." At the arraignment, Harborview's courthouse overflowed. Reporters crowded the steps, while inside 2 families sat shattered. The Bennetts mourning their daughter. The Campbells unable to reconcile the monster with the son they thought they knew. Aaron sat unnervingly still as charges were read. First-degree murder, kidnapping, evidence tampering. His parents wept openly behind him. He never turned to look at them. The prosecutor revealed Aaron's statement to police after his arrest. "I wanted to see if I could control the whole town, make them look where I wanted, feel what I wanted. They never saw me, the real me. They saw what I showed them." When the judge denied bail, a collective exhale seemed to sweep through the courtroom. Only then did Aaron's perfect mask slip, a flash of cold fury in eyes that had fooled an entire community. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Evidence mounted. DNA under Lily's fingernails, fibers from Aaron's jacket, his detailed journal documenting each decision, each manipulation with clinical precision. On the day of the verdict, Detective Donovan testified about what they'd found in Aaron's school locker, a list of other children in the neighborhood, with notes about their routines, which windows they slept near, which parents checked on them least often. The jury deliberated for just 2 hours. "We find the defendant guilty on all charges," the foreman announced to a silent courtroom. At sentencing, Aaron Campbell, now 17, finally spoke. His voice was calm, devoid of emotion as he addressed the court. "You think this is the end of the story? It's not. This is just the beginning of mine." The judge's response was equally measured. "Aaron Campbell, you are sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." As officers led him away, Aaron turned toward Detective Donovan, his expression no longer the perfect mask of the helpful neighbor boy. What she saw instead would haunt her dreams for years to come. Not hatred, not anger, but emptiness, a void where humanity should have been. 3 months later, Donovan received a letter postmarked from the Juvenile Detention Center, where Aaron awaited transfer to adult prison. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 5 words. "Eric Smith is next. Watch carefully." Millbrook wasn't a place where things changed. The steel mill that employed half the town had been there for 3 generations. The same families attended the same churches. The same teachers taught. The children of their former students. Even the weather seemed predictable. Gray skies for 8 months. Grudging sunshine for 4. But on September 18th, everything changed when 4-year-old Tommy Wilson vanished from Henderson Park. Sheriff Curtis Brown arrived at the scene 15 minutes after the call. At 59, with retirement papers waiting on his desk, he'd hoped to finish his career without another tragedy. The playground stood empty now, yellow tape fluttering in the autumn breeze. Tommy's small red jacket still hung on the fence where he'd left it before disappearing. "He was right there," sobbed Jessica Miller, the 19-year-old babysitter who'd been watching Tommy while his mother worked a double shift at the hospital. "I looked down at my phone for maybe 2 minutes. When I looked up, he was gone." The sheriff nodded, keeping his judgment about phone. Distractions to himself. "Did you see anyone unusual around the park?" "No, just the regular kids, and Eric, I guess. But he's always here." "Eric?" "Eric Smith, red-haired kid with thick glasses. Sits on that bench over there most afternoons." Brown knew the Smith boy by reputation. 13 years. Old, small for his age, target of relentless bullying. The kind of kid who existed on the periphery of small-town awareness, noticed mainly when something went wrong. They found Eric still in the park, sitting alone on a bench overlooking the search area. Unlike the other onlookers, he wasn't watching the police activity, but was focused on a notebook, drawing with intense concentration. "Eric?" Brown approached carefully, noting how the boy flinched at his name. "Mind if I ask you a few questions?" Eric looked up, his face partially hidden behind large, outdated glasses held together, with tape at the bridge. His red hair stood out like a beacon against his pale skin. "I saw him," Eric said before Brown could continue. "Tommy, I saw him leave with someone." Brown sat down, keeping a respectful distance. "Can you tell me about that?" Eric nodded, flipping to a clean page in his notebook. With surprising detail, he sketched the layout of the playground, marking positions with precise X's. "Tommy was here, by the slide. The babysitter was over here on the bench looking at her phone. A tall man with a baseball cap came from this direction." Eric's pencil moved confidently across the paper. "He said something to Tommy and they walked away together toward the woods. Did you hear what he said to the boy?" Eric shook his head. "I was too far away, but Tommy wasn't scared. He went willingly." "Can you describe this man?" "Tall, thin, dark baseball cap pulled low." Eric's voice was flat, his eyes never meeting Brown's. He had a strange walk, like maybe his left leg was injured. "Which trail did they take into the woods?" Eric hesitated, then turned the page and drew a detailed map of the park's edge, including trails that weren't on any official map. He marked a narrow path with an X. "This one. It connects to the old railroad tracks after about half a mile." Brown studied the boy, then the map. "That's an unusual trail to know about." "I know all the trails." Eric finally looked up, his expression unreadable behind those thick lenses. "It's the only way to avoid certain people." By nightfall, search teams with dogs combed the woods around Henderson Park. The small Millbrook Police Department called in help from neighboring counties. Tommy's mother, Ellen Wilson, a single parent who'd moved to town just a year earlier, appeared on local news, pleading for her son's return. The next morning, Sheriff Brown found himself thinking about Eric Smith's detailed knowledge of the area. On impulse, he drove to Millbrook Middle School and requested a meeting with Eric's teachers. In the principal's office, English teacher Martha Winters didn't mince words. "Eric is brilliant, especially in spatial reasoning and memory. But socially," she sighed, "the other kids are merciless to him. His appearance, his awkward mannerisms. We've tried to intervene, but—" "Has he ever been violent?" Brown asked. Principal Davis cleared his throat, uncomfortably. "There was an incident last spring. A student's pet rabbit was killed after he particularly humiliated Eric in gym class. Nothing was proven, but—" "Has Eric received any counseling, professional help?" The educators exchanged glances. "His mother requested evaluation several times," Winters said quietly. "The district has limited resources and without documented incidents." That afternoon, Brown returned to Eric's home, a small, well-kept house at the edge of town. Diana Smith, a tired-looking woman in nurse's scrubs, invited him in. "Eric's in his room," she explained. "He doesn't do well with changes in routine, and school being canceled for the search has upset him." In a bedroom lined with books and intricate drawings, Eric sat cross-legged on his bed, a nature documentary playing on a small TV. "I remembered something else," Eric said without preamble. "The man who took Tommy was wearing red sneakers. They were new, clean." Brown nodded, making a note. "That's very helpful, Eric. You notice details others miss." Something like pride flickered across the boy's face before disappearing. As Brown was leaving, Diana Smith followed him onto the porch, speaking in a hushed voice. "Sheriff, my son has difficulties that the school system has ignored for years. But he's not a bad boy. He's just different." Brown nodded. "I understand, Mrs. Smith." But as he drove away, his phone rang with news that made his stomach drop. "Sheriff, we found something on the trail the Smith kid mentioned. A blue baseball cap with dinosaurs on it. Mrs. Wilson confirmed it belongs to Tommy." Brown pulled over, staring at the scribbled map Eric had drawn. The trail marked with an X, a trail not on any official park map, a trail where they'd just found evidence of the missing boy. How could Eric Smith have known exactly where to look? The baseball cap changed everything. By nightfall, news vans from 3 counties had parked outside the Millbrook Police Department, their satellite dishes raised like mechanical flowers seeking signal. Inside, Sheriff Curtis Brown studied the evidence bag containing Tommy Wilson's blue dinosaur cap, still damp from the morning dew. "No blood," confirmed Dr. Reeves, the county medical examiner who'd been called in. "No obvious signs of trauma. It appears to have simply fallen off." What troubled Brown most was the location. Exactly where Eric Smith had indicated on his hand-drawn map. A path so obscure that even veteran officers had trouble finding it. "Search teams have covered 2 miles in each direction from where the cap was found," Deputy Collins reported. "Nothing else so far." Brown nodded, his mind still on Eric Smith. "I want to know more about the boy. School records, medical history, family background, anything we can get." The file arrived the next morning, thicker than expected. Brown spread the documents across his desk, a troubling pattern emerging with each page. First grade. Teacher notes Eric's difficulty connecting with peers. Recommends evaluation for possible social development issues. Third grade. Incident report after Eric brought dead birds to school, explaining he wanted to see how they worked inside. Counseling recommended but never implemented due to budget constraints. Fifth grade. Multiple complaints from parents about Eric's disturbing drawings and fixation on death. School psychologist suggests further evaluation. None documented. Seventh grade. 3 suspensions for fighting, though witnesses consistently reported Eric was defending himself against bullies. 1 note from the school nurse documented unusual bruising patterns and possible signs of self-harm. Most telling was a recent email from Eric's science teacher to the principal, expressing concern about a project where students were asked to dissect frogs. While most students showed typical reluctance or curiosity, Eric demonstrated unsettling precision and focus. He completed the dissection with such methodical care that I initially praised his work. It was only afterward, reviewing his lab notes, that I became concerned. He wrote extensively about the moment life leaves and how death transforms something from someone to something. I strongly recommend psychological evaluation. The principal's response was a single line. Budget constraints prevent additional services without parental financial commitment. Brown set down the papers, a heaviness settling in his chest. The system had failed this child repeatedly. By late afternoon, search teams had expanded to the abandoned railway line that Eric had mentioned. Officer Ramirez radioed in with news that sent Brown racing to the scene. In a small clearing just off the tracks, searchers had found a child's shoe, small, red, matching the description of what Tommy Wilson had been wearing. As officers secured the new scene, Brown noticed a crude fort built between 2 trees, the kind children make for secret hideouts. Inside, they discovered candy wrappers, comic books, and a worn backpack with The initials ES carefully inked on the strap. Eric Smith's secret place. When Brown arrived at the Smith house that evening, Diana Smith opened the door before he could knock, her face pale with worry. "You found his backpack," she said, not a question. "We need to speak with Eric, Mrs. Smith." In his bedroom, Eric sat motionless, staring at the wall. No television this time, no books open, just stillness. "The man with the baseball cap," Brown began gently. "The one who took Tommy. Can you tell me more about him?" Eric's voice came out barely above a whisper. "I made him up." The admission hung in the air between them. "Why would you do that, son?" Eric turned slowly, his eyes magnified behind thick glasses. "So you'd look for Tommy in the right places. And how did you know where to look?" Instead of answering, Eric opened his desk drawer and removed a folder. Inside were dozens of drawings, detailed, disturbing scenes of violence, children being hurt, animals dissected, and scattered throughout, crude self-portraits of a red-haired boy with glasses, surrounded by mocking faces. "They call me Bug Eyes," Eric said flatly. "They say I look like a monster. They throw rocks at me, push me down, take my things." Brown examined a particularly detailed drawing of a small boy being tormented by larger figures. The victim's face was contorted in pain, tears streaming. "Is this you, Eric?" The boy shook his head. "That's Tommy Wilson. Last month at the playground. 3 older boys were taking his toys, pushing him. He was crying. And what did you do?" "I scared them away. Told Tommy he'd be okay." Eric's voice dropped lower. He smiled at me. Called me his friend. "Nobody ever calls me their friend." Diana Smith appeared in the doorway, her face ashen as she took in the drawings spread across her son's desk. "Eric, what have you done?" The boy looked up, his expression unreadable behind those magnifying lenses. "Mom, remember when you said that anger is like poison? That if you keep it inside too long, it changes you?" Eric's voice trembled slightly. "I think mine changed me too much." As Brown drove Eric to the station for formal questioning, he glanced in the rearview mirror. The boy sat perfectly still, staring out the window as Millbrook's familiar streets passed by. Only once did he speak, so quietly Brown almost missed it. Sometimes when people treat you like a monster for long enough, you start to wonder if maybe they're right. The Millbrook police station hadn't been designed for children. Its small interrogation room, with scuffed walls and buzzing fluorescent lights, seemed to swallow Eric Smith's slight frame as he sat across from Sheriff Brown. A social worker named Ms. Patel sat beside the boy, while a video camera recorded from the corner. "Would you like some hot chocolate, Eric?" Brown asked, placing a steaming mug on the table. Eric stared at it, then up at Brown with a hint of surprise, as if kindness was a language he barely recognized. "Thank you," he said softly, wrapping his fingers around the mug without drinking. "I need you to tell me about Tommy Wilson," Brown began, keeping his voice gentle. "The real story this time." Eric adjusted his glasses, a nervous habit Brown had noticed before. "I didn't make up everything. Tommy really was at the playground. The babysitter really was on her phone." "What happened next?" Eric took a deep breath. "Tommy was on the swings. I was reading on my bench, the one behind the big oak where kids don't usually notice me. 3 older boys came, 7th, graders who live on Elm Street. They started teasing Tommy, pushing the swing too high. He was scared." "What did you do?" "I told them to stop. They laughed, called me Bug Eyes and Freak Show." Eric's voice remained flat, but his fingers tightened around the mug. "Then they left, and Tommy thanked me. He said I was brave. And after that?" A long silence filled the room. Eric stared at the table. "Eric," Brown said softly, "we found Tommy's shoe near your hideout. We know you were there together." "He wanted to see it," Eric whispered. "My secret place no one had ever wanted to see. My things before." Brown waited, letting the silence work. "I showed him my comics, my rock collection. He liked the ones that sparkled." A ghost of a smile flickered across Eric's face before vanishing. "We were playing explorers. That's when—" Eric stopped, removing his glasses and rubbing his eyes. Without them, his face looked younger, more vulnerable. "That's when what, Eric?" Nathan Bell and his friends found us. They'd followed us. They started calling me names, saying I was doing weird things to Tommy. They threw rocks at my fort, broke my things. Eric's voice grew quieter. Tommy tried to defend me, said I was his friend. Nathan pushed him down. Brown felt a chill. What happened then, son? I got angry. Not regular angry, different angry. Eric put his glasses back on, his magnified eyes now wet with tears. Everything went dark red. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, like when Dad would get mad before he left us. Ms. Patel made a note on her pad. Brown kept his expression neutral despite the knot forming in his stomach. When I could see again, Nathan and his friends were running away. Tommy was... Eric's voice broke. Tommy was very still. Did you hurt Tommy, Eric? The boy nodded, a barely perceptible movement. I picked up a rock, a big one from my collection, the sparkly one Tommy liked. Eric's words came in halting bursts now. I just wanted Nathan to stop, to feel scared like I always feel. But Nathan ducked and you hit Tommy instead. Brown finished gently. No. Eric looked up, his expression haunted. I hit Nathan. He fell down. But then I kept hitting. And hitting. I couldn't stop. When the red finally went away, Tommy was on the ground too. He wasn't moving anymore. The confession continued in painful detail. How Eric had panicked. How he'd tried to wake Tommy up. How he'd eventually realized what he'd done and hidden the body deeper in the woods. I didn't mean to, Eric whispered, tears now streaming freely. I just wanted the hurting to stop. I wanted them to feel what I feel every day. Why? Did you help with the search? Brown asked. Why draw the maps? Because part of me wanted him to be found, Eric admitted, and part of me thought if I helped enough, maybe it wasn't really me who did it. By dawn, the search teams had recovered Tommy Wilson's body from a shallow grave a mile from Eric's fort. The medical examiner confirmed blunt force trauma as the cause of death. The murder weapon, a quartz-veined rock still stained with blood, was found buried under Eric's mattress at home. Diana Smith collapsed when officers delivered the news, her anguished cries echoing through the small house where she'd raised her son alone after her husband's abandonment. I tried to get him help, she sobbed to Brown. For years I begged the school, the doctors, anyone who would listen. They all said he was just quirky, sensitive, that he'd grow out of it. The arrest of a 13-year-old for murder stunned Millbrook. News vans multiplied. Reporters shouted questions at anyone connected to the case. Outside the middle school, parents demanded to know how warning signs had been missed. At the preliminary hearing, Eric appeared almost unrecognizable in a too large suit provided by his court-appointed attorney. The judge, considering the brutality of the crime, ruled that Eric would be tried as an adult, a decision that split the community between those who saw a monster and those who recognized a broken child. On the courthouse steps afterward, Sheriff Brown faced a barrage of reporters. Sheriff, did the system fail Eric Smith? One shouted. Brown thought of the thick file documenting years of ignored warnings, of a sensitive child transformed by relentless cruelty and neglect into something unrecognizable. We all failed Eric Smith, he answered, quietly, and because of that, Tommy Wilson paid the ultimate price. Later that night, as Brown cleared out his desk for retirement, his replacement, a young deputy from the county force, stopped by. Tough case to end on, the deputy commented. Brown nodded, placing his badge in its presentation. The toughest part is knowing it didn't have to happen. Any one of us could have prevented this. Teachers, parents, doctors. Me. You can't blame yourself, the deputy insisted. Can't I? Brown pulled a folded paper from his pocket, one of Eric's drawings they'd found. It showed a red-haired boy screaming silently while adults walked past, their eyes deliberately averted. At the bottom, in careful handwriting, nobody ever hears until it's too loud to ignore. Lakewood was not like other suburbs of Los Angeles. While neighboring communities struggled with crime and underfunded schools, Lakewood boasted manicured lawns, luxury vehicles, and a high school that sent 90% of its graduates to four-year colleges. It was a place where appearance mattered above all else. Detective Rachel Morales pulled her modest sedan into the high school parking lot, already filled with news vans and police vehicles. 20 hours had passed since 14-year-old Jasmine Carter failed to return home from a study session at the library. "Detective," Principal Whitman greeted her, his tailored suit at odds with his worried expression. "We've gathered Jasmine's closest friends in my office." Inside, 3 teenage girls sat clutching tissues, their makeup streaked with tears. A boy with carefully styled hair and an expensive watch leaned against the wall, his face a mask of concern. "I'm Detective Morales," Rachel introduced herself. "I need to know everything about Jasmine's last few days, even details that might seem unimportant. She was acting weird after math club on Tuesday," offered a girl with long blonde hair. "Like, checking her phone constantly. She wouldn't tell us who she was texting," another added. The boy pushed himself off the wall. "It was probably because of her rejecting Aiden." "Aiden?" Rachel asked. "Aiden Fucci," the blonde girl explained. "He asked Jasmine to homecoming last month. She turned him down. He didn't take it well," the boy added. "He's been weird about it ever since." Rachel made a note. "Where can I find this Aiden?" Principal Whitman cleared his throat. "Actually, he's organized a search party. Most of the student council is with him, distributing flyers downtown." Later that afternoon, Rachel observed Aiden Fucci addressing a group of students in the park. Tall and athletic, with perfectly styled dark hair, he projected confidence as he handed out search assignments. "Remember," he told the crowd, "Jasmine is counting on us. The police can only do so much." Rachel noticed how he positioned himself in front of the local news cameras, his expressions shifting subtly when he knew he was being filmed, a flash of determined heroism replacing casual teenage mannerisms. After the volunteers dispersed, she approached him. "That was quite a speech," she commented. Aiden turned, surprise briefly crossing his face before settling into earnest concern. "Detective Morales? I'm Aiden Fucci. I'm coordinating student efforts to find Jasmine." "So I see, you knew her well." "We're in the same AP classes," he replied smoothly. "Everyone loves Jasmine. Including you? I heard you asked her to homecoming." A flicker of something, annoyance, might pass behind his eyes. "That was nothing. Just friends." "Mind if I see your phone? Standard procedure. We're checking everyone's recent communications with Jasmine." Aiden hesitated before handing over his phone, unlocked. "Of course. Anything to help." As Rachel scrolled through his message history, she found something odd. No messages to or from Jasmine, despite their supposedly close friendship. When she checked his search history, another detail caught her attention. Multiple visits to crime scene websites, articles about missing persons investigations, and one particularly disturbing search. How long before missing? Person presumed dead. All the searches had been conducted before Jasmine's disappearance. "Interesting reading habits," Rachel commented, watching his face carefully. Aiden shrugged, maintaining eye contact. "I'm thinking about a career in criminal justice. True crime is fascinating." As he spoke, Rachel noticed a notification pop up on his phone. A new follower on an account called Finding Jasmine Truth. She made a mental note to check it later. "Well, thank you for your cooperation, Aiden. I'm sure you'll keep us informed if you learn anything relevant." He smiled confidently. "Absolutely. Detective, we all want the same thing, to bring Jasmine home safely." But as Rachel walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that Aiden Fucci wanted something else entirely. Attention. Back in her car, she pulled up the Finding Jasmine Truth account on her phone, created just hours after Jasmine was reported missing. It already had thousands of followers. Every post was crafted for maximum engagement with dramatic updates and calls to action, all centered around Aiden's search efforts. Her phone rang. The tech team with an update on Jasmine's last known location. Her cell phone signal had pinged from an abandoned construction site on the edge of town. The same area where, according to his location history, Aiden Fucci had been the night Jasmine disappeared. The abandoned construction site at Lakewood's edge stood like a concrete skeleton against the evening sky. Half-built, luxury condominiums, casualties of a developer's bankruptcy, created a labyrinth of unfinished walls and exposed rebar. Yellow police tape now encircled the perimeter as officers conducted a grid search of the sprawling property. Detective Morales picked her way carefully across the debris-strewn ground, following the tech specialist who held a tablet displaying cell tower data. Jasmine's phone sent its last ping from somewhere in this quadrant, he explained, indicating a section of the site. Signal terminated at 8:42 p.m. last night. Rachel nodded, her flashlight beam cutting through, gathering shadows. And Aiden Fucci's location data? His phone was here from approximately 8:15 to 9:10 p.m. The timing couldn't be coincidence. But without more evidence, location data alone wouldn't be enough for a warrant. Detective, an officer's voice echoed across the site. We found something. Behind an unfinished stairwell, partially concealed beneath construction debris, lay a pink backpack embroidered with the letter J. Inside, Jasmine's school ID, textbooks, and a leather-bound journal. Rachel carefully opened the journal, finding meticulous notes on school assignments, interspersed with more personal entries. The most recent, dated just days earlier, caught her attention. A. Won't stop texting. Blocked his number again, but he just creates new accounts. Told him to leave me alone at math club, and he got this weird look. Not angry, something worse, like I was a problem to solve. Back at the station, Rachel obtained emergency warrants for Aiden's social media accounts. What she discovered sent a chill down her spine. Behind his public profiles lay shadow accounts obsessively documenting Jasmine's daily movements. Photos taken from a distance. Screen. Captures of her social media posts. Detailed notes about her schedule, friends, and habits. Most disturbing were the drafts never posted. Fantasies about becoming famous for solving a high-profile case. References to documentaries about killers who outsmarted police. And one chilling note. People only appreciate what they've lost. By morning, the search at the construction site intensified. Cadaver dogs were brought in, focusing on a recently disturbed area near the foundation. As Rachel watched the dogs work, her phone buzzed with a news alert. Aiden Fucci had just held another press conference about his search efforts. This time, he'd tearfully described a vision he'd had about Jasmine possibly being near water. He was organizing volunteers to search the reservoir 5 miles from town, in the opposite direction from the construction site. He's diverting attention, Rachel murmured to her partner, creating his own narrative. Before they could discuss further, a shout came from the far side of the site. One of the dogs had alerted. Officers began carefully removing debris and loose soil from a shallow depression between concrete pillars. Rachel's phone rang. The digital forensics team with another update. Detective, we've recovered deleted videos from Fucci's cloud storage, the technician reported, his voice strained. You need to see these immediately. The videos showed Aiden alone in his bedroom, practicing different emotional responses, crying on, Kiryu displaying righteous anger, rehearsing concerned expressions in his mirror, each take slightly refined, like an actor perfecting a role. The file name, Finding Jasmine. My public response. The creation date. 2 days before Jasmine disappeared. Rachel ended the call just as the excavation team signaled a discovery. The atmosphere at the site shifted instantly. The professional bustle of investigation giving way to the somber reverence that always accompanies death. As she approached the shallow grave, Rachel steeled herself for what they'd found. But professional preparation couldn't buffer the emotional impact of seeing Jasmine Carter's body, still in her school clothes, partially buried beneath the concrete and debris. The cause of death appeared to be blunt force trauma. A heavy object had struck her head with devastating force. Nearby, half hidden under a tarp, investigators discovered a bloodied piece of rebar, its end bent slightly from impact, and next to it, a more damning piece of evidence. A phone tripod positioned to have captured the entire scene. Rachel looked from the makeshift grave to the tripod's position, a horrifying realization dawning. Jasmine's murder hadn't just been committed in rage or passion. It had been staged, documented, produced, as if someone had been creating content rather than taking a life. The arrest of Aiden Fucci unfolded like a scene from one of the crime shows he so obsessively watched. As morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Lakewood High's cafeteria, tactical officers surrounded the table, where he sat at the center of his search volunteer team, planning the day's activities with rehearsed determination. Detective Morales approached with measured steps, her badge visible. "Aiden Fucci, you're under arrest for the murder of Jasmine Carter." A hush fell over the cafeteria as students froze, phones raised to record the moment. For a brief second, something flickered in Aiden's eyes. Not shock or outrage, but something else entirely. Something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. Then, as if remembering his role, he switched to bewildered innocence. "This is insane. I'm trying to find her." As officers led him away in handcuffs, Rachel noticed he kept glancing back to ensure the cameras were capturing his face. Not the panicked look of the wrongfully accused, but careful quarter-profile angles that highlighted his defined jawline. In the interrogation room, Aiden maintained his performance, demanding a lawyer with rehearsed indignation, but the evidence was overwhelming. Forensics had matched soil from his shoes to the burial site. His DNA was on the Guillaume murder weapon. Most damning of all were the recovered video files, not just his practice sessions, but fragments of the actual murder, carefully shot from multiple angles. "He didn't just kill her," the district attorney told Rachel later that day. "He produced her death like a film project." A search of Aiden's bedroom revealed the full extent of his obsession. Hidden behind a false wall panel was a collection of notebooks detailing his path to notoriety, inspirations clipped from documentaries about infamous killers, statistics on which murder cases gained the most media coverage. A chart tracking social media followers gained during the search for Jasmine. One notebook entry, dated months earlier, was particularly chilling. "True crime creates bigger celebrities than Hollywood now. Killers get Netflix specials, podcasts, fan mail, but the smartest ones aren't caught. They're the ones telling the story instead of becoming the story." His parents, prominent Lakewood socialites, appeared genuinely shocked. His father, a surgeon, broke down during police interviews. "We gave him everything," he repeated, shell-shocked. "Private tutors, sports coaches, media training for his college applications." "Media training?" Rachel questioned. "For his Harvard interview," his mother explained. "We hired a consultant to help him appear more authentic, more engaged. They said his natural responses seemed practiced." Digital forensics uncovered the fuller picture. For years, Aiden had maintained a carefully crafted public persona: student leader, athlete, compassionate volunteer. But his private accounts revealed someone studying human behavior like an alien might, meticulously documenting which expressions earned, which responses, which stories garnered sympathy or admiration. His particular fascination with true crime had evolved from casual interest to obsession. He'd analyzed how killers became famous, which cases captured public imagination, and eventually, how he might create his own sensational case. Jasmine had been selected not from passion or revenge, but cold calculation. Her rejection of his homecoming invitation provided just enough motive to make the story compelling. Her popularity would ensure maximum media coverage. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Aiden's performance finally crumbled when prosecutors played the recovered video, showing him directing Jasmine's final moments like a film director, positioning her body for maximum visual impact, narrating to the camera his expected rise to notoriety. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. At sentencing, the judge addressed the courtroom. "In my 30 years on the bench, I have never encountered a crime so calculated, so devoid of human empathy. The defendant didn't just take a life, he reduced a vibrant young woman to a prop in his twisted narrative." When the sentence was pronounced, life imprisonment without possibility of parole, Aiden finally dropped his mask. For the first time, his expression wasn't rehearsed but raw, genuine fury contorting his features as he realized his carefully planned story had reached its final chapter. As officers led him away, Aiden locked eyes with Detective Morales, his voice barely audible but words perfectly clear. "They'll still make documentaries about me." Rachel watched him disappear through the courtroom doors, wondering how many more Aidens were out there, studying crimes like his, crafting their own paths to infamy behind carefully curated social media profiles. When she returned to her office that evening, a package awaited on her desk. Case files requested from neighboring counties. 3 unsolved disappearances with striking similarities to Jasmine's case. Each investigation had mentioned an enthusiastic teenage volunteer who had organized search parties. Each volunteer had maintained a true crime blog. Pinecrest, Tennessee, prided itself on being a safe haven in an increasingly dangerous world. White picket fences lined streets named after trees. American flags fluttered from porches. Church bells chimed on Sunday mornings. Crime was something that happened elsewhere, in cities where people didn't know their neighbors' names. Until 8-year-old Ellie Henderson vanished on a Tuesday afternoon in June. Officer Sophia Martinez, recently transferred from Chicago's Homicide Division, arrived at the scene within minutes of the call. Ellie had been walking the 2 blocks from her home to a friend's house, a journey she'd made dozens of times before. Somewhere along those familiar streets, between houses where she'd trick-or-treated last Halloween, Ellie had disappeared. "We've called everyone," Mrs. Henderson explained, her voice breaking as neighbors gathered on her lawn. "None of the children have seen her. It's like she just vanished." Sophia nodded, her practiced calm masking the dread that always accompanied missing child cases. In Chicago, she'd learned that the first 3 hours were crucial. Here in Pinecrest, where the police department handled mostly parking violations and noise complaints, she found herself automatically taking lead. "We'll need to organize search teams," she announced to the growing crowd. "Volunteers to check yards, outbuildings, wooded areas." A slender woman with tired eyes stepped forward. "I'm Sarah Phillips. My son Joshua and I can coordinate volunteers. He knows all the kids in the neighborhood." Sophia glanced at the teenage boy standing slightly behind his mother. 14, maybe 15, with sandy hair falling across watchful eyes. Something about his posture, slightly hunched, hands in pockets, suggested discomfort with attention. "That would be helpful," Sophia replied. "Thank you." By evening, the search had expanded to include state police. Flyers with Ellie's smiling face, gap-toothed grin, blonde pigtails, appeared on every telephone, pole and store window. News vans parked along Main Street, reporters practicing somber expressions before their cameras. Sophia worked alongside Detective Richard Taylor, Pinecrest PD's most experienced officer, interviewing neighbors and mapping Ellie's likely route. As darkness fell, they paused at the community center where volunteers gathered for coffee and assignment updates. Sarah Phillips moved efficiently among the searchers, distributing maps and flashlights. Her son Joshua trailed behind, handing out bottled water, his eyes downcast. "The Phillips family has been incredible," Taylor commented. "Sarah's organized everything perfectly, and the boy's been out searching since we started, even skipped baseball practice." Sophia studied Joshua as he carefully arranged water bottles on a table. "He seems very invested. Good kid, quiet type. His father's military, strict. Disciplinarian from what I hear. Keeps the boy in line." Something in Taylor's tone made Sophia glance at him. "Is that a good thing?" Taylor shrugged. "Different parenting styles. Not my place to judge." The search continued through the night and into the next day. Joshua Phillips didn't return to a school, instead spending hours distributing flyers door to door. Sophia noticed how he avoided eye contact with adults but spoke softly to younger children, asking if they'd seen Ellie with gentle persistence. "You're really dedicated to finding her," Sophia commented when their paths crossed near the park. Joshua looked up briefly, then back at the stack of flyers in his hands. "She has to be somewhere," he said, his voice barely audible. "She has to be." On the 3rd day, Sophia visited the Phillips home to interview the family formally. The house was immaculate, almost unnaturally so. Robert Phillips, Joshua's father, sat ramrod straight in his armchair, answering questions with military precision. Sarah Phillips offered coffee in matching mugs, her movements efficient but her hands slightly trembling. Joshua sat on the edge of the sofa, eyes fixed on a point just past Sophia's shoulder. "Did you know Ellie well?" Sophia asked him. "She comes by sometimes," Joshua answered, "to see our dog." "Joshua's good with the neighborhood children," Sarah added quickly. "They trust him." Something about the exchange felt rehearsed, as if the family had prepared their answers in advance. As Sophia left, she noticed Robert Phillips place a firm hand on his son's shoulder, fingers digging in slightly. Joshua's expression didn't change, but his shoulders tensed beneath his father's grip. That night, an unexpected thunderstorm hit Pinecrest, dropping 5 inches of rain in 3 hours. Streets flooded, power lines fell, and in the Phillips basement a pipe burst, sending water cascading through the foundation. When the emergency plumber arrived the next morning, his routine call quickly became anything but routine. His screams brought neighbors running, police sirens wailing. Close behind, Sophia arrived to find Sarah Phillips collapsed on her front lawn, paramedics attempting to treat her for shock. Robert Phillips stood stonily by the driveway, his face unreadable, and from inside the house came the unmistakable sounds of crime scene protocol being established. "Officer Martinez," Detective Taylor called from the doorway, his face ashen. "We found her, under Joshua's bed." The discovery transformed Pinecrest overnight. Yellow police tape surrounded the Phillips house, fluttering in the summer breeze like obscene decorations. Neighbors who had stood shoulder to shoulder during searches now gathered in whispered clusters, their expressions oscillating between horror and morbid fascination. Ellie Henderson's body had been concealed in a makeshift compartment built beneath Joshua's bed frame, crude but effective, hidden behind stored boxes and athletic equipment. The medical examiner estimated she had been dead for approximately 72 hours, since shortly after her disappearance. At the police station, Joshua Phillips sat alone in the juvenile interview room, his lanky frame hunched forward, eyes fixed on the table. Through the observation window, Sophia watched the boy who had helped organize search parties for the child hidden beneath his own bed. "Has he said anything?" she asked Taylor. "Nothing since we found her. Just keeps asking to see his mother." Sarah Phillips was in the adjacent room, sedated after her collapse at the eye. Drunico, Robert Phillips had been separated from both, his military bearing finally cracking under questioning, revealing a volatile temper that officers had to repeatedly address. "I want to try," Sophia said. Inside the interview room, Sophia placed a cup of hot chocolate before Joshua, just as she had done for traumatized children in Chicago. The boy didn't acknowledge the gesture, his gaze still downcast. "Joshua," she began gently, "I need to understand what happened to Ellie." For several minutes, silence filled the room. Then, almost imperceptibly, Joshua began to rock back and forth. "It was an accident," he whispered finally, his voice cracking. "I didn't mean to hurt her." "Tell me about the accident." Joshua's rocking intensified. "She came to see Rocket, our dog. We were playing in my room. She was laughing." Sophia waited, allowing him space to continue. "Dad came home early. He wasn't supposed to be back until 6. Joshua's voice dropped even lower. "He doesn't like when kids come over without permission. Says it makes noise, messes up the house. What happened when your father came home?" Tears began streaming down Joshua's face. "Ellie knocked over his model ship, the one he built in Okinawa. It broke into pieces." His breathing became irregular, panicked. "He was going to be so mad. You don't know what he's like when he's mad. Were you scared of what he'd do?" Joshua looked up for the first time, his eyes reflecting a terror Sophia had seen before. In children from homes where violence was the norm, not the exception. "I told her to hide under the bed until he calmed down. I didn't know she'd hit her head when she fell. There was blood and she wouldn't wake up, and he was coming up the stairs and I just... You panicked," Sophia finished softly. "He would have killed me," Joshua whispered, the absolute conviction in his voice chilling. "If he knew what happened to his ship, what happened to Ellie, he would have killed me." The interview continued for hours, revealing a household ruled by Robert Phillips' explosive temper and exacting standards, a home where Joshua had learned to lie reflexively, to hide evidence of transgressions, to maintain the facade of perfection his father demanded. Sophia emerged from the room emotionally drained, the pieces of the tragedy assembling into a coherent but devastating picture. Joshua hadn't killed Ellie intentionally, but his instinctive reaction to hide her, to conceal the accident, had been shaped by years of psychological conditioning. As she prepared to interview Sarah Phillips, Taylor approached with a disturbing update. "We found something in Joshua's closet," he said quietly. "A hidden panel with notebooks. Detailed accounts of his father's abuse, dates, injuries, threats, photos of bruises, hospital visits explained away as sports injuries. He was documenting it," Sophia realized, "building a case." "There's more," Taylor continued, his expression grim. "The last entry, written the night Ellie disappeared, ends with, 'When they find her, they'll finally see what he made me become.'" The trial of Joshua Phillips divided Pinecrest along invisible lines. In coffee shops, church pews, and grocery aisles, residents debated whether they were witnessing the prosecution of a calculating killer or the tragic consequence of systematic abuse. The courtroom itself reflected this division. On one side sat Ellie Henderson's family, their grief hardened into resolve. On the other, a sparse collection of Joshua's supporters, mostly teachers and classmates, who couldn't reconcile the quiet boy they knew with the crime he'd committed. Conspicuously absent, Robert Phillips, who faced his own charges of child abuse and evidence tampering after investigators discovered he'd known about Ellie's death before the plumber's discovery. Sarah Phillips occupied a painful middle ground, torn between maternal instinct and moral horror. She sat directly behind her son each day, her face a mask of exhaustion as the prosecution methodically laid out their case. Joshua Phillips deliberately concealed Ellie Henderson's body, the district attorney argued. He participated in searches knowing exactly where she was. He looked her parents in the eye and offered false hope. These are not the actions of a panicked child, but calculated deception. The defense painted a different picture of a boy who'd spent his life navigating his father's unpredictable rage, developing elaborate survival mechanisms, learning that truth led to pain while deception offered safety. Joshua didn't hide Ellie's body to escape justice, his attorney insisted. He hid it because that's what he'd been trained to do with anything that might trigger his father's violence. His actions weren't malicious but automatic, the conditioned response of a child living in perpetual fear. Medical experts testified to the pattern of historical injuries documented in Joshua's medical records: broken bones, concussions, burns, each with explanations that strained credibility, but had never been questioned by authorities. School counselors recounted their failed attempts to intervene, thwarted by Robert Phillips's reputation as a respected veteran and the family's outward appearance of normalcy. Most damning was the testimony of Dr. Eleanor Mitchell, a child psychologist, who had evaluated Joshua. "What we see here is the culmination of prolonged psychological conditioning," she explained to the jury. Joshua's instinct to conceal Ellie's accidental death wasn't a moral choice, but a survival response, the same mechanism that had protected him from his father's violence for years. The prosecution countered with the undeniable horror of Joshua's actions following Ellie's death, not just hiding her body, but actively participating in searches, offering false leads, maintaining the pretense of concern while her family suffered unimaginable anguish. "Trauma explains behavior but doesn't excuse it," the prosecutor reminded the jury during closing arguments. Regardless of his home life, Joshua Phillips knew right from wrong. He chose deception over truth, repeatedly, deliberately, causing additional pain to a grieving family. After 4 days of deliberation, the jury reached its verdict: guilty of manslaughter and evidence tampering, with a recommendation for leniency due to mitigating circumstances. As the judge prepared to announce sentencing, Joshua was permitted to address the court. For the first time since his arrest, he turned to face Ellie's parents. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely audible. "Not just for what happened to Ellie, but for every day after, for every lie I told, for every search I helped with knowing she wouldn't be found." His composure cracked. "I was more afraid of my father than I was of going to prison. I know that doesn't make sense to normal people, but in my house nothing was scarier than making him angry. The courtroom fell silent as Joshua continued, describing a childhood where perfect obedience was the only protection against unpredictable violence, where problems weren't solved, but hidden, where the appearance of normalcy was maintained at any cost. I didn't plan to hurt Ellie, but I did plan to hide what happened, because that's what I always did when something went wrong. Hide it, fix it, pretend it never happened. His voice broke completely. I didn't know how to live any other way. The judge's sentence reflected the complexity of the case. Joshua would remain in juvenile detention until age 21, then serve an additional 10 years in adult prison. As officers led Joshua away, Sofia Martinez watched from the back of the courtroom, the case that had brought her to Pinecrest, now officially closed, but leaving questions that would haunt her career. How many other families maintained perfect facades while hiding horrific secrets? How many other children were being shaped by fear into something unrecognizable? That evening, as she packed case files into storage boxes, her phone rang with news of another incident. A teenage girl in neighboring Mapleton confessing to a brutal crime that had shocked the small religious community. Her name is Alyssa Bustamante, the caller said. 15 years old. You might want to see this one for yourself. Mapleton existed in a world apart from modern America. Nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, the small community of 2000 was known for its historic church spires and deep religious roots. Local ordinances limited business hours on Sundays. School board meetings opened with prayer, and residents measured their standing not by wealth or profession, but by their dedication to faith and community values. When 9-year-old Elizabeth Olton disappeared on her way to her grandmother's house, Detective James Cooper was 3 weeks from retirement. At 61, he'd spent his entire career serving Mapleton, where serious crime was so rare that the police station closed at 7 p.m. on weeknights. "The good Lord watches over our community," Cooper often said, both as comfort to victims and warning to troublemakers. But on that October afternoon, as search teams combed the woods between Elizabeth's home and her grandmother's house a half-mile away, even Cooper's steadfast faith wavered. Something about this disappearance felt different from the occasional runaway or custody dispute that typically constituted Mapleton's missing persons cases. She never made it to Grandma's, Ellen Olton. Elizabeth's mother explained through tears. "I called when she was 10 minutes late. We've searched everywhere." Cooper organized volunteers at the church community center, where Pastor Williams led prayers before dispatching teams. Among those gathered was 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante, her dark-rimmed eyes and dyed black hair standing out among Mapleton's conservative residents. "I want to help find Elizabeth," Alyssa told Cooper, her voice surprisingly gentle despite her rebellious appearance. "She sits next to me sometimes during youth group." Cooper nodded, somewhat surprised. Alyssa's reputation in Mapleton was complicated. Raised by her deeply religious grandparents after her mother's imprisonment for drug offenses, she'd become increasingly defiant in recent years, cutting class, experimenting with Gothic fashion, challenging authority. Yet here she was, volunteering. While most teenagers were at football practice or study groups. "We appreciate all hands," Cooper replied, assigning her to a team searching the eastern trails. For 2 days, the search expanded outward from Elizabeth's last known location. Helicopters with thermal imaging swept the dense woods. Trained dogs followed scent trails that disappeared at the paved county road, suggesting a possible abduction. Prayer vigils ran continuously at Mapleton's 3 churches. Alyssa participated in every search shift, tireless in her efforts. Several times, Cooper noticed her studying his face as he gave instructions, her expression unreadable behind carefully applied black eyeliner. On the 3rd day, as hope began to wane, Cooper interviewed Elizabeth's classmates again, seeking any overlooked detail. 10-year-old Jenny Mills mentioned something that caught his attention. Elizabeth was scared. "The girl with the scary eyes," Jenny said quietly. "Scary eyes?" Cooper asked. "The big girl who dresses all in black. She watches us at recess sometimes from outside the fence." Elizabeth said she asked weird questions. "What kind of questions?" Jenny looked down at her hands. "Like if we ever..." Wondered what it felt like to die. That afternoon, Cooper visited the modest home where Alyssa lived with her grandparents, Harold and Karen Bustamante. The couple welcomed him with the anxious courtesy of people unaccustomed to police visits. "Alyssa's been so helpful with the search," Cooper began carefully. "I just wanted to ask if she might have seen anything we've overlooked. She's always had a caring heart beneath that phase she's going through," Karen explained, clearly uncomfortable with her granddaughter's gothic aesthetic. "The Lord is still working on her." Harold nodded firmly. "Prayer will bring her back to the right path. We've increased our family devotion since she started acting out." In her bedroom, Alyssa sat cross-legged on a neatly made bed, the space revealing an unexpected contradiction. Despite her rebellious style, her room was meticulously organized. Books aligned perfectly on shelves, clothing folded with military precision. The only decorative items were a large cross above her bed and a collection of journals arranged by color on her desk. "Detective Cooper," she acknowledged without looking up from her phone. "Any news about Elizabeth?" "Not yet," he replied, studying her. "I'm hoping you might help us. I understand you sometimes watch the younger children at recess." Something flickered across Alyssa's face. Surprise, perhaps, or wariness. "I like watching people, understanding them." "Did you ever speak with Elizabeth?" "Specifically?" Alyssa set her phone down carefully. "I talk to lots of kids. They're more honest than adults." "About what?" Her eyes met his directly for the first time. "About important things. Life, death, what matters." A small smile played at her lips. The things adults pretend don't exist. As Cooper left the Bustamante home, an uneasy feeling settled in his stomach. The same instinct that had guided him through 4 decades of police work. Something about Alyssa's careful answers and unwavering gaze disturbed him more than any outright defiance would have. Back at the station, he requested a search warrant for the Bustamante residence, particularly Alyssa's journals. His colleagues seemed skeptical. "The Bustamante girl?" Deputy Reynolds questioned. "She's been more help than most adults in this search." "That's what bothers me," Cooper replied. "She's searching very hard, for someone she barely knew." Before the warrant could be processed, however, everything changed. At dusk, as volunteers returned to the church for evening prayers, Alyssa Bustamante approached Cooper in the parking lot. "I know where Elizabeth is," she said quietly. "I can show you." Twilight descended over the woods outside Mapleton, as Detective Cooper followed Alyssa Bustamante along a narrow trail. 2 deputies walked behind them, hands resting on their holstered weapons, the gravity of the situation evident in their tense silence. "It's just ahead," Alyssa said, her voice unnervingly, calm as she navigated the growing darkness with confidence. Past those 2 large oaks, Cooper studied the teenager walking before him, her measured steps, her perfect posture, the methodical way she scanned the surroundings. None of the typical anxiety or urgency one would expect from a witness, leading police to a missing child. "How did you find this place, Alyssa?" he asked carefully. "I come here sometimes to think." She glanced back at him, her expression unreadable in the fading light. "People don't bother me here." The trail opened to a small clearing where freshly disturbed earth formed a rectangular depression approximately 4 feet long. Beside it lay a shovel, its metal head reflecting the last rays of sunlight filtering through the trees. "She's there," Alyssa said simply, stopping at the edge of the clearing. As the deputies secured the scene and called for the forensic team, Cooper turned to Alyssa. "Did you see who did this?" The girl's dark-rimmed eyes met his directly. "Yes." "Who was it?" "Me." The confession came without emotion, delivered with the same flat affect one might use to comment on the weather. Cooper felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "You're saying you killed Elizabeth Olton?" Alyssa nodded once. "I wanted to know how it would feel." Back at the Mapleton police station, in the small room typically used for processing traffic violations, Alyssa Bustamante sat across from Cooper and a hastily summoned child psychologist. A video camera recorded the interview as Alyssa's grandparents waited outside, their prayers audible through the thin walls. "I need you to explain exactly what happened," Cooper said, struggling to maintain professional detachment. Alyssa recounted the events with disturbing precision. How she had dug the grave 5 days before the murder, just to see if I could. How she had approached Elizabeth after school, offering to show her a shortcut to her grandmother's house. How she had led the child into the woods, making casual conversation about school projects and favorite television shows. She trusted me completely, Alyssa noted, a flicker of something, satisfaction, puzzlement, crossing her face, even when I told her to close her eyes for a surprise. The medical examiner would later confirm what Alyssa described next. Multiple stab wounds, strangulation, evidence of the victim being buried while still barely alive. Did you feel remorse afterward? The psychologist asked. Guilt? Alyssa considered the question with academic interest. I felt nothing. That was the strangest part. I thought I would feel something significant. But there was just emptiness. She tilted her head slightly. I kept participating in the searches to see if being around her family would make me feel something. It didn't. When Cooper asked why she had finally confessed, her answer was equally dispassionate. I got bored waiting for someone to figure it out. A search of the Bustamante home revealed the full context of Alyssa's actions. Hidden beneath her mattress, a diary documented her deteriorating mental state with chilling clarity. I wonder what it would feel like to kill someone. I have so many emotions locked inside that never escape. Maybe this is the only way to release them. Another entry, dated just after Elizabeth's disappearance. I just killed someone. I strangled them and slit their throat and stabbed them. It was amazing. As soon as you get over the "oh my God, I can't do this" feeling, it's pretty enjoyable. More disturbing than the content was the handwriting itself. Precise, almost artistic, with carefully drawn flourishes and perfectly straight lines, suggesting not frenzied emotion but methodical contemplation. In a separate hiding place, investigators found prescription bottles for powerful psychiatric medications, most untouched, with labels indicating they had been prescribed to Alyssa months earlier for diagnoses including bipolar disorder, depression, and emerging antisocial tendencies. When confronted with this evidence, Harold and Karen Bustamante broke down in tears, revealing a crucial piece of the puzzle. We stopped giving her those pills, Harold admitted. We believed prayer and faith would heal her better than worldly medicines. The pastor said her problems were spiritual, not mental. Karen nodded through tears. The doctors wanted to hospitalize her last year when she tried to hurt herself. We thought they were overreacting, trying to take her from our Christian home. As dawn broke over Mapleton, Cooper sat alone in his office, the case file open before him, retirement papers pushed aside. In 38 years of law enforcement, he had never encountered such a perfect storm of factors: severe mental illness, religious denial, institutional blindness, and a community too focused on appearance to recognize warning signs. The prosecutor had already indicated that despite her age, Alyssa would be tried as an adult. The evidence was overwhelming, the confession unambiguous. But as Cooper reviewed the psychiatric evaluations now flooding in, one line from a child psychiatrist haunted him. This tragedy wasn't inevitable. It was the predictable outcome of untreated mental illness, colliding with a system that preferred not to see the darkness in one of its children. Later that morning, as Cooper prepared for a press conference, a deputy delivered one final piece of evidence, a letter Alyssa had written the night before her confession, addressed to Elizabeth Olton's mother. I wanted to feel something, anything real. The letter began, "Now I understand I never will, but maybe my punishment will give you the peace I can never find."